Welcome to this episode of Reflections, the Wisdom of Edgar Cayce. My name is Peter Woodbury, and I have the pleasure today of interviewing empath, researcher, and counselor and intuitive Tanya Carroll Richardson. And we'll be talking particularly about her book, Self-Care for Empaths, the 100 activities that empaths can engage in for self-care. She'll be speaking here at the A.R.E, and her subjects are understanding an empath's psychic system and how to navigate a sensitivity growth spurt. So without further ado, let's begin. Let's bring Tanya on. Hi, Tanya. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us here on Reflections, the Wisdom of Edgar Cayce.
I'm so excited and honored to be here.
Oh, thank you. That's nice to hear. Good. And this whole, sometimes I call it the empath revolution, kind of how we're becoming more aware of empaths and the value of empathy and kind of destigmatizing empathy. And so it's I'm excited to talk about your books and your research that you've done on this subject. Where should we start? Should we start with one of your books or?
We could. I wonder if, sometimes I will get people saying, I wonder if I'm an empath. I'm not quite sure. So perhaps that's a good place to start, is just having a loose definition of what an empath is.
Yeah, let's hear that. What's a definition of being an empath?
So the way I describe it to people is empaths are hyperperceptive, meaning they perceive more than other people. They can pick up more easily on other people's emotions. They can pick up more easily on other people's energy, physical energy in spaces. And sometimes empaths can even be hyperperceptive with their physical stimuli. So for an empath, sometimes it's like, ooh, the loud noise in here, it's really loud to me. Mm-hmm. Or, ooh, that temperature change is really bothering me. So hyperperceptive, meaning they simply perceive more. And as you were saying, sensitivity it's kind of an emerging thing in science and psychology that people are starting to study and look into even more. So the question is, was I born an empath? Did I just recently wake up to my sensitivity? Is sensitivity something that can be cumulative over my lifetime? I think both of those are true. But if you resonate as being hyperperceptive, that's the important thing, that you are really perceiving more in some ways.
Mm-hmm. Yes, when I've thought about the subject, it's almost like our society has become very valuing of numbing. So it's almost like buck up, buttercup kind of mentality. And if your hand is numb, for example, it's injured. Numbing is not the healthy state. So it's like having feelings is much more healthy. So I think this kind of work is helping people that are empaths kind of get destigmatized, almost like they're. Yeah, go ahead.
I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm glad you used the phrase numbing, because that's something I talk about with empaths. The British call it the stiff upper lip or something, like you've just got to harden yourself to life and kind of soldier through it. But really, something that can happen with empaths, because they are hyperperceptive, they can more easily become overwhelmed or overstimulated by stimuli, whether mm-hmm. that's emotional, energetic, or physical stimuli. So you might have a friend that works at the same office as you do, and after a busy day of deadlines, talking to people, this is pre-pandemic, when mm-hmm. we're in the office, you're feeling a little overwhelmed, like, wow, that was a lot today. I need a quiet evening. I need to make a nice meal and relax with a book. I need a low stimulation environment. Whereas your friend, who maybe is not as sensitive, is like, I'm ready to hit the town, or mm-hmm. I'm ready to go call a bunch of friends and family tonight and get some more stimulation. So the thing that empaths have to watch out for is, I always speak about healthy, what I call retreat and recover time. Mm-hmm. So when you're overwhelmed and overstimulated, it's just recognizing that I'm frazzled. I need to pull back and retreat and recover. The mistake that some empaths can make is they start numbing out. So they don't understand the concept of healthy retreat and recover. Their systems become chronically overwhelmed. So they'll start numbing out. I love to binge watch things. So I'm not trashing binge watching things. Mm-hmm. But sometimes people can numb out with food, alcohol, Netflix,
Right.
and try to anesthetize their system. So that's one thing I teach with empaths is being able to recognize when you're overstimulated and then knowing what your healthy retreat and recovery time activities are.
And what are some of those activities that are more healthy to do when you're overstimulated?
Well, like I said, sometimes, for some people, a glass of wine is fine, or watch a few Netflix.
Oh, yes. We're all happy to hear that.
So, it's different from some people find the sober path is better for them. For some people, they can indulge moderately in these things. But it's really watching out for when you are numbing out with things. And some healthy retreat and recover times, one of my favorite ones to emphasize for empaths is a creative hobby.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't have to be, I'm writing the next great novel. It could be, if you have the next great novel in you, but it's really about saying, let me make myself a nice dinner and get lost in the creativity of this. Let me go out to the garden.
Mm-hmm.
Let me journal. Let me, maybe I make jewelry in my spare time.
Mm-hmm.
It's something where you can kind of get lost in a space for a few hours and it's healthy.
So you retreat to like a world that's kind of internal, safe place, and it's like a little internal playground, like if you collect stamps or if you make jewelry or something like that.
Exactly. And I also talk about creating kind of a cocoon atmosphere. I call it the Impasse Sanctuary. So it's like, another great retreat and recover time is let me go take a bath and listen to a great podcast. Like something like this, like something I'm really interested in, I want to learn more about.
What did you say you called it?
I call it cocooning
Uh-huh.
and creating an impact sanctuary.
Impasse Sanctuary, yeah.
So a low stimulation environment where everything's pretty, everything's soft, everything's turned down. And I like to remind empaths, you can retreat and recover with other people. So maybe you have kids and it's been a crazy day and you're like, look, let's put on some James Taylor and do a puzzle. Everything's low, everything's calm, everything's muted. We're focused on something, but we're not, screaming at each other or having too much stimulation. Or if you have a partner, you could say, hey, let's get into bed and we'll both read side by side, or let's watch a great documentary. So you don't have to retreat and recover alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen I've seen some of those memes, on social media where the husband's taking the picture of the wife has gone to retreat in the bathroom, and outside the bathroom door are the 3 kids, the 2 cats, the dog. They're just like waiting to pounce for when she comes out of her little sanctuary.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because I think that's an important thing to remind empaths is recognizing that they are sensitive. They might be more sensitive than other people in the household, and they have to really be a little firm about that retreat and recover time.
Mm-hmm.
Like mommy needs this hour in the bath this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
You can go talk to the other partner in the household. You can go play, but unless it's an emergency, I need this time here.
Now, do you find in relationships, do you find that empaths gravitate towards each other, or do you find that usually it's an empath who's with someone who's less of an empath who kind of has to understand it and create kind of a safe zone for them? Is there any kind of relationship fit for empaths?
That's another excellent question. I think it really goes every which way.
Mm-hmm.
Because remember, as an empath, you're still a unique individual.
Mm-hmm.
You still have your unique personality, what you do in the world, who you love, that's all unique to you. So it doesn't have to be that you are with another empath. I think the only thing that's really important is that the other person understand and respect your sensitivity. Mm-hmm. So I do private sessions with clients, and obviously a lot of people who are attracted to me are empaths. Mm-hmm. So I will sometimes get a client who has recently realized how sensitive they are, and they're frustrated that their partner isn't into this stuff, doesn't want to learn about empaths, doesn't want to learn about intuition and sensitivity. And I always say, that's okay. They don't have to learn about it. All you have to do is figure out what you need and figure out a way to simply communicate it to them. I think it's this old kind of 1950s myth that people have to be this perfect fit or this other half for each other. Now in modern spirituality, we call it the twin flame.
Mm-hmm.
And nothing wrong with that. But remember, you're both two individual people. You don't have to be similar about everything. You just have to be able to work together.
Yes, I think it sounds like there needs to be that communication where, like you were saying, the empath can say, I need to take a bath, you need to be with the kids for a couple hours or on a day like that. And then that the partner understands that and, kind of in some ways honors their partner's empath attributes and sees it as something that's a value. Just like maybe a non-empath would need to be with their friends on a day on the weekend. They need their outside social time. And it's like the empath would need more kind of private, safe space created.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, another interesting point you bring up, because I do think a lot of us are familiar with the idea of being an introvert or an extrovert.
Right.
And I think as we're becoming more emotionally intelligent, culturally, we're realizing that this stuff all exists on a spectrum, right? So someone should be farther along the extrovert spectrum, meaning they prefer to get their stimuli outside of themselves. They're very nourished by being around other people and having outside stimulation. On the opposite end, introverts are very nourished inside when they're alone in their own world. So, it all exists on a spectrum. So I like to remind clients that, you could be an extroverted empath. You could be a very introverted empath. It's about learning.
Oh, I see. That's interesting because people stereotype the empath as an introvert. And what you're saying is that's not necessarily the case.
That's not necessarily the case. And you can also be a little of both. Whenever I took that Myers-Briggs, I landed right in the middle. I was a little bit more on the introvert spectrum, but I was really in the middle of that Myers-Briggs for introvert, extrovert. I leaned a little more introvert. So for me, I really am nourished by things like this, where I'm talking to someone great and interesting and having a wonderful conversation. So I think you've got to just, I'm glad we're talking about this, because one thing I like to warn empaths about is isolating. So sometimes empaths will be chronically overwhelmed and overstimulated, and they can think, wow, I really need to pull back. It's just too much. And they could get the balance a little wrong and start isolating. So empaths are wired to feel very deeply and connect deeply with other people. That's why you can feel other people's energies and emotions in your own system. If you get it too wrong and you start isolating, that's going to feel just as yucky as if you're overstimulated all the time.
Oh, that's interesting, because I've noticed that like with the pandemic, with people staying home, working from home, it's almost like you would think that that's like empath heaven, and to some degree it is. But I think I've noticed also that there's that isolation. It's almost like there's too much isolation, and so there's that. It's like maybe when things are too big, it's too extreme. And so I think what you're saying is that the empath has to find their level of balance and not, realize that if they're too outside, they'll get tired, but also if they're too alone, they'll get isolated, and then that's not good either.
Right. So it's a trial and error, and I think really because, as you said, empaths are so connected to their own emotions and energy. Just notice how you're feeling. If you decide you need a weekend off, I just need to do some alone time, retreat and recover, and then on Sunday morning you're like, I'm a little lonely, I'm a little down, I'm a little bored. Maybe I need to call a friend and catch up and have a great chat with a friend I haven't talked to in a long time. So just play it by ear, be flexible, let it be organic. So there's no hard and fast rules with this stuff.
Yeah, it's like as we're talking, I'm thinking about myself, and I guess I'm pretty empathic. I'm on the balanced with introvert, extrovert, but I find like that if I'm having dinner with one friend, I almost like stack that week to have my extrovert week, kind of get my fill, and then the rest of the month, the next 3 weeks, I'm done. Like I'll just enjoy my own private time.
That's very typical. What I say for people who are sensitive and they're maybe on that introvert extroversion is you might have, like, let's say you have a big weekend, like there's a wedding, or you have family town, or something where it's like a lot of extrovert activities, I'm really out there. the next weekend, or maybe even the next 2 weekends, you're like, I'm pulling back. I'm going to go to my favorite bookstore and read by myself. I'm going to take a walk in the park with my dog. I'm really pulling back this weekend because last weekend it was so fun, but I was so out there and so kind of stimulated.
Mm-hmm. Now, are pets are pets helpful for folks on that high empathy range, or is that not really? Do you not coordinate that with that at all?
I think pets are another thing that's very individual.
Mm-hmm.
Some sensitive people have a special relationship with animals, and they couldn't imagine living without an animal.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are some people that are like, oh my gosh, that would be so stressful having to care for this other entity, feed it every day, walk it, take it to the vet. So again, I think that really is something you'll know intuitively about yourself, whether an animal is right for you.
Yeah, that's true, because I have some friends that I think are highly empathic, and they just love their dog. Like their dog is like their confidant. And then some folks that have no pets, I just almost like they don't want that energy around them.
Right. And I like that you say energy, because maybe for the other people, they find the pets just overstimulating. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, this is just too much. Maybe they have a couple kids and they're like, throwing in a pet on top of it is just going to be a circus.
Yeah. Now, in your book, Self-Care for Empaths, you have those 100 activities to help people manage. What are some of the highlights of that? What are some of those activities that we've probably talked about some of them, but what comes to your mind?
Yeah, a couple of things come to my mind. It's a good time to mention one of the main theories I present in the book is empaths are hyperperceptive, as we've talked about. So lots of time empaths will have a little bit of a fear of absorbing too much. They're nervous about like, oh, I'm going to go into work and I'm just going to absorb all this energy and emotions from other people. I'm going to go to this grocery store and be overwhelmed by all the chaos in the grocery store. So I like to empower empaths and remind them that they aren't just this sponge that is forced to walk around the world and absorb things constantly. Because I like to teach empaths about the difference between opening up to feel and then pulling back to witness and observe. So that's what one of the main things I teach is, yes, you are wired naturally to open up and feel, but with practice and intention, you can learn how to pull back and observe people and still get intuitive information about them, but you're not opening up to feel so that you're feeling everything they're feeling in your own system.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's good advice. One of the things, when Edgar Cayce would give readings, he would put his hands over his abdomen. And when he was asked about that, he just talked about how that protects you energetically, that there's like an energy center here that, especially if you're laying down, it can be vulnerable. But did you find any, like sometimes, when you're like with somebody who's kind of energy vampiring, you just kind of naturally cover the solar plexus to kind of protect yourself?
Not really. I mean, and I think this is a good moment to say whatever works for you. So if you take that wisdom from Edgar Cayce and you're like, let me try that, let me do something with my body language to kind of shield myself when I'm around, my aunt, who maybe is a lovely person, but can also be a bit of an energy vampire. If I try this when I'm with that person, let me see if I notice a difference. For me, it's really about teaching people more mental and emotional concepts of creating energetic and emotional space between you and that person.
Mm-hmm.
A really quick way that you can practice doing this is something that I had to learn quickly giving intuitive readings, is learning how to let go of a conversation. So when people contact me for intuitive readings, they're obviously talking about the biggest issues in their life right then. Mm-hmm. And we're, for an hour in this intuitive rabbit hole where we're talking about their love life, their career, their soul purpose, all this very deep stuff. And then when the conversation is over, I hang it up. I'll say a quick prayer for that person and it's gone. Mm-hmm. And part of that is training your mind not to go back into it. Mm-hmm. That's gone. Let me focus on my lunch I'm cooking. Mm-hmm. Let me focus on these emails. Let me focus on my partner. Mm-hmm. So some of it is simply focus, learning what you're focusing on, and then mm-hmm. that's where your energy goes, what you're focusing on. So some of learning how to observe and witness people is simply what you're focusing on. Another trick that I like to teach empaths is how people can mirror energy. So sometimes, let's say you're at party or a social function, or here in the pandemic, you're getting on a Zoom with your boss, and you notice immediately that your boss is really anxious, really nervous about this project, really anxious. You're feeling all this anxiety. You're hearing the anxiety in that person's voice. Stop, ground into yourself. Don't mirror that energy. That's when you get sucked into it. And then suddenly you're anxious and your voice is going up. So anchor into your own energy, remind yourself you're not mirroring it, and purposely have an energy that's lower. Have a very calm energy as you talk to them. I find that almost 9 times out of 10, that person will begin mirroring your energy. They will calm down. Their shoulders will relax. Their voice will go down, because humans are wired to mirror energy. Yes. So if you can be kind of the Zen master or the Jedi master that sets the energetic.
Oh, that's great advice, yeah.
Many times people will mirror it back to you.
Because I was a therapist for many years, and one of the things we learn is that affective states are contagious, so feeling states. And so like you're saying, if somebody's anxious, but the job of the therapist is that you, like you're saying, you try to metabolize that and you try to stay calm so that they start to absorb the calm feeling instead of picking up that it's like this escalating pattern of anxiety. You become more anxious, they become more anxious. And that's
right.
it, yeah.
It's not about trying to control someone else's emotion, because sometimes, as a therapist, people can if somebody else's emotions, like they're often very anxious or they're often very angry, a sensitive person can want to try and control their emotions because they don't want to feel it.
Right.
So it's not about that. It's not about saying, I don't want my manager to be anxious and angry. I'm going to try and force them not to be. It's just about staying grounded in your own energy. And as you said, almost holding a grounded, safe, calm space for them, which is what therapists do. Mm-hmm. Like, I know you're very emotional and upset. I understand that. That's normal. You have a right to feel that way. Let me hold this safe, sacred, grounded space for you as we talk.
And then what role do you feel like setting boundaries is? Like, could you speak to that matter?
Yeah, I think setting boundaries, as we all know, is crucial. This is another thing with emotional intelligence in the culture we're all talking more about. As a former therapist, you know all about it, I'm sure. But for me, one thing I'm writing a second book about empaths. I'm starting to work on it now, and I'm going to emphasize assertiveness. So for empaths, because they are so compassionate, they, if they really do feel what other people are feeling, meaning I can really put myself in your shoes. Like, I really feel that you're suffering. I get why you're suffering. I get why you feel so angry or sad. I can really feel it. I understand your perspective. This is why empaths make great diplomats. They can really understand where other people are coming from. The problem then is, because you can become so compassionate and care so much, you still have to set firm boundaries. That's your life. That's your stuff. I'll try and help you in a healthy way when I have the time and space to, but I can't live your life for you. I can't rescue you. I can't become codependent. That's that blurry line that can really start to exist for empaths, because as being hyperperceptive, they can become very compassionate and really want to help.
That's so interesting, because it's reminding me again, when I was working as a therapist, it's almost like, empathy is the backbone of good counseling. And I felt that it's almost like it's a muscle that you develop. So, over the years of doing counseling, I became more and more empathic, but then at the end of sessions, the end of the day, it's like you can't turn that off. And so I felt that I had to be protective about, the movies I watched or kind of situation I put myself in, because I had just developed so much empathy and compassion in that end process. It was a good thing, but it also became something like almost like you become more sensitive to sound. And so what more other people are comfortable with, their range of sound becomes a little too loud for you. And so it was a strange evolution in that process.
Yeah, and what you're describing is what we were talking about in the beginning of the podcast of how some empaths are actually more sensitive to physical stimuli. Mm-hmm. So you could have a friend who's like, oh, they're so fabulous. They're what I call intense energy. They're very extroverted. They're the life of the party. They feel their emotions really deeply. They really process things externally. They tell you everything they're thinking and feeling, and they just light up a room. They're just so full of life. However, this person might be really loud, or this person, might sometimes just feel like too much. Like, I love them to bits and pieces, but today it's just too much, So that's another thing in relationships is it doesn't mean you can't be with a very intense life of the party, big passionate person. My own partner is that way. It's just learning how to navigate some of the differences in your threshold for physical stimuli.
Again, I'm thinking of how when I go to a restaurant, it's not uncommon for me to move tables. It's almost like they want to put me in one table. I don't like that where it's situated. Something, it's almost, I'm not quite conscious of why I don't want to sit there. Maybe it's a loud group, but then I'll sit in one place. I just went out for dinner last night and moved one time. And then even the second place, I would have been happy to move a third time, but I kind of held it back.
Yeah, no, well, and it's interesting as you were describing that, I think it was honoring your sensitivity. Mm-hmm. It's like, look, I'm going to be assertive here. Like, this table that's in the thick of all the noise or right by the kitchen or whatever, it's really overstimulating for me. But then also you were like, look, I'm not going to ask to move a third time. I'm simply sensitive. This place is a little overstimulating. I've done the best I can to move. I'm not going to be a sensitivity prima donna. I'm just going to, adjust this. And sometimes it's like letting yourself know if you're in a situation that's very overstimulating, like you're in a conference or you're at a grocery store and it's just chaos. Mm-hmm. Remind yourself gently with love, we're gonna go home soon. Mm-hmm. We're just gonna be at this restaurant. We'll enjoy it. We can make it through this moment. Yeah. And then when we get home, we'll retreat and recover.
Yeah, sometimes I think one can think that the unpleasant moment is gonna last forever. And it's almost like having that discipline of just saying, okay, like this is gonna be okay. The food's coming soon. You're gonna enjoy that. All those. It's almost like what I hear you saying. It's like it's important for an empath to develop like a monitoring part of themselves, to kind of talk to themselves about how to navigate the things. It's almost like a very sensitive part, and then a part that just kind of is protective and counseling. It's almost like having a best friend inside yourself.
I love that you said that, because that's something I do an annual self-love calendar. It's like a page-a-day calendar. It has like a positive affirmation and action step. And that's one thing I always put in the calendar every year is be your own best friend. Mm-hmm. I think Byron Katie, she told a funny story once about her daughter. After she got into all this high-level spiritual work, her daughter was really angry. And she was like, I'm angry about the times you didn't mother me properly. And now you're this spiritual guru. And, Wayne Dyer had the same conversations with his kids where they were slightly, PO'd that they were this huge guru. And it's like, but you made real mistakes as a parent. And Byron Katie said she told her daughter, and this resonated with me so much. She said, you are always the best person to mother yourself, because no one knows you and what you need more. Right. And that's where it's about coming home to yourself and having time where you really ground into what do I need? What do I want? What am I feeling? Then once you can mother yourself like no other person. You can be a best friend to yourself like no other person.
Yeah, that's why I've thought that often, that rather than blaming your parents, it's like become your parent. It's like whatever your parents didn't do for you, learn how to be that nurturing, loving person to yourself. Like take yourself to parks, take yourself, do the things that you wish someone had done with you, or sometimes you can't go back in childhood and necessarily go to Disneyland. Maybe that's not what you want to do, but those self-care, paying attention to your feelings, noticing things and responding to them, those are all things that anybody can develop. And sometimes it seems that we forget to do that, like we're not the best kind of parent to ourselves.
Yeah, and I agree with you. As you said, like let's shift a little bit from longing for our parents to change into these people we want them to be, and take the power back and say, let me give myself what I wish I'd gotten from them or what I still wish I get from them now. At the same time, we're honoring that inner child that is angry and sad. And
listening to that part of yourself, and journaling, perhaps just let it come out.
Or even therapy. I had a pretty unique childhood, and it created a lot of unique dysfunctional patterns in me. And it wasn't until I got into a place with a great therapist like you used to be a therapist, where I could see those patterns and how those childhood issues were really ricocheting through my adult life, and I had no clue. So I think it is important to say, somebody did a number on me in childhood. Maybe it's not about, finding them and blaming them or judging them. Maybe it is, I won't tell anybody how to feel, but it is about saying, let me look at it constructively so I can feel the emotions, learn the patterns, and then I can start healing and shifting my life with this wonderful knowledge.
Oh yeah, we're having such a great conversation. I was reading Stephen Porges last night. I don't know if you know him, but he writes on, he's very science oriented, but one of his themes is basically, I love this quote. He says, when we've had trauma in childhood, as we grow up, our patterns of connection get diverted into patterns of protection. And so instead of everything that, if you had a healthy, non-traumatic, you might feel the world is safe. But once you feel the world isn't safe, you're kind of hyper cautious, hyper vigilant. And a lot of people ask that question, how do you discern between when you're empathic and really feeling a danger in a situation versus when is it you're projecting your own over cautionary self into the environment?
Yeah, and yes, the hypervigilance for sure, and even empaths who maybe had what they would consider a neutral, normal, or even idyllic childhood can become hypervigilant because they are hyperperceptive. So if you're chronically overstimulated, you can become hypervigilant about
it can almost be somewhat traumatic to be, especially in high school, where everybody's trying to be the same and fit in, and that's just, I think, agony for somebody who's hyper, very sensitive, very empathic.
Well, it's interesting because I don't have children, but I have a lot of friends who have children, and I even have friends who are high school teachers. And what I've noticed about younger cultures or younger generations, which is really encouraging, is they're so much more aware of this stuff. The language is so much more normal to them. They can advocate for themselves. They really understand different diagnoses of things. So that's really encouraging. And I actually wrote a book for teens called Zen Teen, which is mindfulness techniques for teenagers, because the project came to me in a very interesting synchronistic way. I didn't look for it, but the synchronicity was most of my major childhood traumas happened when I was a teenager. Oh. So as you know, it's a trying time for anybody. And then you throw in all these insane traumas on top of it. So that's why I wanted to put that book out there, kind of like, I wish I had known some of these tools when I was that age.
Oh, good. Yeah, I'm really happy that there's more kind of this kind of material coming out for children and for teens, because I think that's a real underserved population. At that age, you're shuffled around. And if parents can be aware for children to read them these kind of books to help normalize themselves so they don't feel so strange or like outcasts in a way.
Right, exactly. And learning and helping the teenagers maybe have their own sovereignty a little bit, because that's something that starts to happen when you're a teenager. You're really starting to blossom into this adult version of yourself, and you are being asked to make some decisions that are pretty big. Do I want to go to college? Do I not? What do I want to do those first couple of years after I finish high school? Am I starting to get some inklings about what I would want to be in the world, or is this just too soon to think about that? So, and some teenagers like me were kind of thrust out into the world, get an apartment, get a job, be #adult for real. So, to different degrees, teenagers are being asked to make very adult decisions when they are still in a very frontal lobe formative place.
Right. That's a good point. Now we're going to wrap up soon, but I wanted to ask a couple more questions. Do you think that, here at the Edgar Cayce, we're always thinking in, querying age, by seeing these big views. Do you think that there's an influx right now of empaths? Do you think there's always been the same percentage? There's always been 10% of the world is highly empathic, or do you think that there's more at this time? The reason why it's such a focus at this time?
My instinct, my intuition tells me it's twofold or threefold. Mm-hmm. One, as you said, simply as the culture gets more, sensitivity becomes more normalized. This is more being studied, talked about, written about. People are going to wake up naturally to their own sensitivity. Wow, I've been sensitive my whole life. No one explained this to me. Everything's making sense now. Mm-hmm. Also, I have a feeling that the younger generations are more sensitive because they're growing up in this kind of culture. So I think you see with the younger generations, they are more like, let's not hurt people's feelings, let's be kind, all this kind of stuff is more normalized for the younger generations. Let's have equality, let's have justice, let's have everything equal. The younger generations are more on board with this because they've grown up in this world where sensitivity was more normalized, and possibly these younger generations coming in are more sensitive souls. I mean, I'm open to that as an explanation of it as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting subject. It's like, it seems like, on one hand we have like what's been called the cancel culture, and then we have the Me Too movement and these kind of movements towards social change, which seem like they're empathy driven. And so there's almost like this tension between let's change things to be a more compassionate society versus like, oh, that's going too far. So I wonder if there's like we're coming to this place where there's a highlight on both of these aspects of the human personality.
Yeah, well, I think it's this huge shift time, and I didn't live through the 60s, but a lot of people are talking about the late 60s and the mid 60s when there was
true. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that.
Social revolution and change, and it was the younger generation saying, "Hey, this is right. This is how it should be. Right. I don't want to accept your paradigm, your talking point that change happens slowly, and like." This is just obviously a human issue, and this is how it should have been from the beginning. Mm-hmm. So, and I think there's also for any kind of group, that's been marginalized and has been treated unfairly for so long, there's this built up anger, I would imagine. I think some of the women in the Me Too movement felt that. It was generational, ancestral anger, things that had done to them that they'd seen done to their mothers that they felt in their system. Mm-hmm. I can't speak for people of color, but I'm guessing there's some of that happening as well. Yeah. So I think when people are shocked by some of the anger they see come out of the Me Too movement or the Black Lives Matter movement, they're not taking into account, how we haven't served these populations well enough at all.
Right.
In this lifetime, you're not taking into account all the suffering that's been cumulative through, history.
Yeah. Yeah. Now I work primarily as a regressionist. So a lot of past life work. And so I'm seeing that this is like one of the first generations of women not basically being treated as property. And so it's like there's a lot of past lives of just abuse and torture of women, and they're coming in, and it's almost like there's the energy of like enough. And so I think that this, whatever you call it, feminist, Me Too, there's a lot of energy behind that, and I think it's ultimately it's a good thing. It needs to happen, and I think that our world becomes a better place through that, a safer place.
Right, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because in sessions with clients, one thing that we will sometimes tune into is, what was your soul's game plan? Mm-hmm. What was your soul thinking when it incarnated this time? What was on its top to-do list agendas? And for some women, I really will hear freedom. And I will hear from these ancestral voices, ancestors who've passed, from the old soul's memory. I'm so excited to be on the planet at this time when I can be a woman and I can have my own money. I can have my own profession. I can, all these things, these freedoms. I can choose to have children. I can choose not to have children. All these things, these freedom things that women in the just, 500 years ago, or we've all seen Mad Men, even not that decades ago, women were not allowed to do any of these things. So I think there's a lot of souls incarnated as women this lifetime that are thrilled that while there's still more work to do for women, we've got a female vice president.
Oh, it's like, I just read that I think 20 or 30 years ago, a married woman couldn't have a personal checking account. She couldn't have her own bank account. So it's not that long ago, that things were incredibly restrictive. Well, gosh, we've had such a fascinating conversation. I just want to leave a little bit here for you. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like to speak to?
Not really. It's just been such a pleasure and an honor to speak to you here today. And I think you brought up so many, excellent talking points that we covered. And, I have the book, Self-Care for Empaths. So you just flash that.
We'll put that on the bottom, how people can get that.
And they can find me at tinyblessings.com. That's my website.
Okay, we'll put that. We'll show that too.
Yeah, something that's kind of a nice free tool to offer people. I write a lot for a wonderful website called Mind Body Green. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Say again, Mind Body what?
Mind Body Green.
Mind Body Green?
Right. So lots of great content on that site for everybody, but I regularly write articles.
Oh, good.
So if you sign up for my newsletter, I always send those out for free.
Something that. Oh, okay. That's good. Well, I'm looking forward. I know you'll be here soon, and I'll be moderating your conference. I'm looking forward to, and we'll put a link for that, and I'm looking forward to more conversations with you. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for your excellent work that is so helpful, obviously, to so many.
Thank you. It was just my pleasure and my honor.
Great. Have a good rest of your day.
Okay, thank you.